Sustainability leadership for a new era. That image there was drawn to advertise the 1990 Greenhouse Conference in Adelaide, which was run by the Greenhouse Association of South Australia, which is a group that I was very much involved with forming and leading up. It was formed in 1989 in the wake of the 1988 National Greenhouse Conference series that the then Labour government ran across this country. I keep getting Groundhog Day moments with this stuff. 1988 is getting to be a long time ago. It'll be 25 years next year since that conference. At that time, we were inspired to form this Greenhouse Association of South Australia, a citizens group committed to the idea of combating climate change. Nobody argued about whether it was a real thing or not. That wasn't on the agenda then at all. And we had people from right across the political spectrum joining us, getting very excited and determined to take action. And we were talking about something like, I don't know, 5% reduction on 1990 levels by 2000 or 2005. The goalposts have shifted now so much it's ridiculous. And it's not getting any better. But anyway, a quick one here. In 60 minutes, 8,700 more people on the planet, over 3 million tons more carbon dioxide, 1,500 hectares of rainforest gone. Oh, that's what happens. It's don't let your thumb wander off to the right-hand side of the... I remember as a student of architecture, we were taught something about ergonomics. And I always thought that was a really great idea. Ergonomics, making things work in a way that you could easily use them, so that they were intuitive, so that you could feel what was going on. Whatever happened to ergonomics? Okay. I'm not a very good dancer, so I won't do anything. It's, you play. No, next menu. Play slideshow. Thank you. Really not that hard. Okay, 1,500 hectares of rainforest lost, 6,000 hectares more desert. There's not a, when you lose some rainforest, you get a bit of desert. It's both. You lose the rainforest and you get desert. And 856 hectares covered by cities every hour. Oh boy. Can we build resilient and sustainable cities? That's one heck of a question given our history. The history doesn't suggest that we've done very well in the past. Do we know how to build resilient and sustainable cities? The evidence of the present isn't very encouraging. What makes a city resilient? Well, have we got a clue? I don't know. We do know that if you have an irrigation-dependent culture that knocks down all of the trees, it doesn't last very long. We've seen that happen before. And hang on, doesn't that sound a little bit like what's happening in Australia? Oh, no. Unreal. Thank you. It's very gentle with this. And what makes a city sustainable? Well, we're pretty sure it doesn't involve having lots of cars. So we've got a few clues out there. What happens to a city when it falls apart? This is the big question. What survives? We're talking about resilience, sustainability, very much to do, as was mentioned this morning, sustainability is very much to do with survival. And so the big question is, when the going gets really tough, what happens? What happens when a city falls apart? What survives? And the answer is the community. When buildings fail, all you've got left is people. And they found that out in Christchurch, the hard way, in an absolutely astonishing way. People survive, the community survive, and because the community is surviving, they're able to fix up the physical infrastructure and the buildings that were what people think of as the city. But I think it's much more important to see cities as collections of people, as systems of community and social interaction. The buildings and stuff is just what we churn out along the way in the process of being people. Empires come and go, but cities survive. Through war and disaster, cities survive. They may get changed around a little bit, but they survive. And here, I think this one, I don't know, this should be tattooed on all urban planners and managers. The urban ecosystem is the most elaborate geographical control system or integrated resource management system in human experience. Ian Douglas wrote that in one of the very first and best books on urban ecology, and it published in 1983. And that's it. When the problem gets tough, how can we manage all the resource problems we've got, all the environmental problems we've got? The answer is we already do manage all of those things, but we just do it rather badly. And the mechanism that we use is the city. So we've got the tool, we've got the vehicle, we've got the mechanism for doing what we need to do, and we just haven't quite worked out how to do it yet. Although we did hear from Peter Newman's presentation some of the things that are going on in some cities. Now, a well-designed built environment can provide the basis for sustainable physical performance, energy, water, resource use, etc. Despite the fact here in Australia we're talking about sustainability, but we've got one of the world's highest rates of vegetation clearance, liquidating ecological capital. The picture on the left is Canberra a few years ago, being cleared in the time-honoured fashion. The picture on the right is Kangaroo Island from 1945 through to 1985. Kangaroo Island won an award just a few years ago for being one of the world's top wilderness destinations. The black stuff is original landscape. So, and it hasn't got blacker since 1985. Our idea of what constitutes wilderness when we're up here in Cairns maybe is fairly good, but for the rest of the world, the idea of wilderness is now a massively contaminated concept, if you like, poorly understood. After 10,000 years, we still use basically the same tools and skills to make our cities. And I derived this definition from Lewis Mumford, the greatest writer on cities ever. He defined technology, as I read it, as tool plus use. What does that mean? Well, if you've got a hammer, it's a tool, you bang nails into bits of wood, you can make things, that's a very creative technology. You can take that exact same hammer, and God knows why, but you could smash somebody's head in with it. You then have a weapons technology. The difference is not the tool, it's the system of values we apply to its use. So we've got all sorts of, we think of as technology. What we've got are lots and lots of tools that we're not always using very well. Sustainability and resilience comes out of learning to use them better, not to do this sort of thing. So I've been obsessed with this stuff for a little while. I drew this back in 1978, and I'm still able to use it, and it still means something, and I think that's terrible. Simply having the physical elements, like renewable energy, green roofs, can't guarantee the city will be sustainable. They have to be in the right places, connected, designed, and configured to contribute genuinely to sustainable performance. So it's like having the tools. If you don't use them properly, you don't get the right result. Having the bits and pieces, if you don't connect them properly, put them in the right places, you don't get the right results. If you don't have the right things in the right places, they just don't work properly. They really don't work properly. The gentleman there, well, there's two of us actually, but that's based on Richard Register, who wrote the very first book on ecocities back in 1987. I put my head on it. Likewise, merely having the elements of a community infrastructure in a city doesn't guarantee the community will be effective. So again, you can have all the bits and pieces. So we've got one of these, we've got a meeting place over there, we've got a public square over there. If they're not configured well and connected in a sensible way, it's not going to work. And above and beyond such things as schools, meeting rooms, halls, clinics, sports stadiums, stadia, if you will, community infrastructure is made up of those spaces and places that facilitate the essential workings of human society. Too often, in modern architecture and planning, such things are somewhat neglected. Just as the pipes and wires must be correctly sized and connected to enable liquid and electronic currents to flow and deliver, so community infrastructure elements have to be right size, shape, and have the right connections to support community function and interaction. A successful community requires active participation by citizens in making and managing the buildings and social structures of a successful community. And you can carry on reading that all day if you want. Christchurch showed us what the real city was when it fell down. And ecologically responsible development, which is what we're talking about, I think, needs to be facilitated and reinforced by being built with and for a real community of people. Now, this isn't community as some kind of nice, warm, fuzzy, where it's nice to know people and be nice to them. You know, we're all nice together. That's not community. That's just like, that's silly. Community is what you have that supports social activity, interaction, and it enables us to do things. It's through community structures that we make our cities. It's within our cities we have our political differences. We don't make separate cities or separate politics, or at least not yet. Cultural fractals, and I talk a little bit about this concept of a fractal as a cultural fractal, which conveys a lot of information very economically about where it's derived. An urban fractal is the smallest piece of the urban system that possesses enough of its essential characteristics to define the larger city, a kind of cultural fractal. The essential characteristics embodied in an urban fractal are about patterns of relationship. It's not to do with the buildings, it's not to do with the roads, it's about how they relate to each other. Consider, for example, you want to meet somebody. Well, there's a couple of different ways you can go around meeting people. One is better, perhaps, than the other. At 5 kilometers per hour, if you bump into somebody, it's considered a very positive thing and you probably stop and have a chat. At 50 kilometers per hour, if you meet your friend coming head on at that speed, it's not going to end nicely. So, how you configure the way we meet is really important. And we have adopted the model in the lower image here as the basis for planning of our cities for far too long. We need to return to, as you heard earlier this afternoon, the walking model. For all sorts of very good reasons. So here we go, another one. The urban fractals that contain the patterns and processes of ecological cities catalyse development of the urban fractals that contain the patterns and processes. It's no accident that the scale of the tribe, the village, and the neighbourhood are so similar. That's the kind of level that we're comfortable with in terms of company of others. As a chap in Ross Chapin, a chap in America called Ross Chapin, is pioneering ways to put real community back into fairly middle-class real estate. But his tool is the pocket neighbourhood. And all this is about how we can actually move forward from where we are now. A pocket neighbourhood is around 10 to 20 households sharing outdoor space designed to promote that neighbourly interaction. So it's a little piece of real estate, if you will, that's built around the idea that people share space as well as have their private homes. In Christie Walk in Adelaide, we did that. Ross identified Christie Walk as a pocket neighbourhood. I didn't know it was going to be one, but it works as an example in a modern, dense, sustainable inner urban environment. So this idea that you can do these little bits which incorporate all of the essential characteristics that you're looking for. Oh no, here it goes again. And then you put them together, you build the little pocket neighbourhoods into urban fractals, and you can imagine that way, I hope, that you can slowly transform a city or create a city. Christie Walk's high density, but it's not high rise. It's not big enough to be a fractal. It's the right size to be recognised as a pocket neighbourhood. This is a diagram. All the sort of greeny circle areas and orangey circle areas are areas that people can meet. They are gather, or they're threshold zones between one space and another, and it's an entirely pedestrian environment. So this is a detailed example of where the planning of a place creates places to facilitate community interaction. And these are just some images, all from Christie Walk. This is all 27 dwellings on 2,000 square metres. That's 2 quarter-acre blocks in the old money. So it's really quite dense by Australian standards. It's got a number of different places within it. And this is how you facilitate community. You can't make community, you can't force people to get along, but you can provide the spaces that work when people want to do things, meet each other, and so forth. These are all aspects of that same project. So a richness of a kind of a pattern of local cultural input is also a very important part of making places, creating places, environments that people can relate to in a way. This story was done as a community art project. All of these things can be employed as strategies and techniques in making more sustainable, resilient urban environments. Here in Christie Walk we have the first genuine roof garden in South Australia, where there are no poisonous guided missiles. Most of us drive one. And the roof garden has come along very nicely. It's got pedestrian pathways running through it, even though it does accommodate some car parking. So all this is by way of an example. This was initiated by a community organisation. It was developed as a non-profit exercise, and it's turned out to have an extremely strong, thriving community, which has in turn infected the city locally, and it's brought things in like the Go Get car share system into Adelaide. So by having these very strong, effective community nodes, as it were, in an existing city, you start to also begin to change that city. In small ways, they don't make the headlines, but it makes a difference. Threshold zones are those spaces in between your immediate private space and the public space. And this is a quote from a land developer in America. Building a neighbourhood is about having a vision and understanding how all the pieces and layers fit together. Skipping over a detail or two is the difference between a subdivision and a neighbourhood. And that's one of the big problems I think we've got with development in this country. Developers are not committed to the detail, the fine grain of creating place. They are simply in the business of making money. Somehow or other, and I think it's through the planning system, ideally the economic system, but I can't see who's going to work on changing that enough, but certainly through the planning system, there must be an opportunity to cause things to go in the right direction and encourage developers to make decisions which get them engaged at the level of this chap. I think we have to build as if it's already 2050. I think that's a crucial thing. We need to be remaking our towns and cities right now for the conditions that we might imagine we're going to be facing in 2050, because they are going to be facing it. We talk forever about future generations. I look into the eyes of future generations. They're, even shorter than me. They're very young, and they're going to live into this, what we're currently forecasting to be a sort of hell on earth. So we should be doing something now, because what we do now is going to be what they live in that time. So we do it one fractal at a time. If we do that, this concept of the urban fractal, which I'm still pursuing, and I'm very keen to get feedback on, and yes, you can buy the ebook shortly when I finally deliver it to the publisher. The concept of the urban fractal offers a way to capture the essence of sustainable urbanism by working at a scale that can be understood at the level of the local neighbourhood on through out to the level of the region. These images are drawn from a project I started with a group of students back in 1996. It's Adelaide. North is to the left, because this was mapped on the basis of the watershed rather than cardinal points. 1996, nothing exists of the original landscape prior to European settlement. 2136, you can see what Peter would, I think, readily identify as polynucleated city. Taking an existing urban sprawl that's a real environmental disaster and working it backwards to a living, healthy environment that supports people and the rest of life. And positive development, a term from Janice Birkeland, who wrote a book, put a book together with that title, it's not just about being resilient, I think. It's about being regenerative. We cause so much damage now, we've got to do what we can to put things back and encourage life to regain a foothold, and not simply sustainable, but ecologically vibrant. We need to start seeing positive ways of interpreting the kind of stuff that we're talking about, I think. And working at the scale and the scope of the urban fractal, I believe these goals actually come within reach because you can start working on them at your very local level. So, think sustainable modern architecture and living landscapes. Oh, there it goes. Look, I'm almost, I nearly made it. My thumb slipped. I know it's going to be on time. Okay, thank you. Sustainable modern architecture and living landscapes form regenerative architecture of cities, towns, and living systems, you see? Think. Small fractals. But that's not all. And that's how you put together a city and make that transition. Lewis Mumford, the entire planet is becoming a village, and as a result, the smallest neighbourhood or precinct must be planned as a working model of the larger world. There he was in 1960. Groundhog Day again. Groundhog Day again. And finally then, homework. Work out what the characteristics are of the urban fractal for your community, and make your next project, whatever it is, whatever you're working on, a fractal of that vision. And if we all did that, and we all created these whole pieces, then you can imagine transformation happening widespread and rapidly rather than incrementally. That's it. Thank you.